Please don't make the same mistake I did. I'm not saying that because something dramatic happened in the way people like to imagine. There was no hotel room, no lipstick on a collar, no wild confession shouted across a parking lot in the rain. If that's the kind of story you think this is, then you already understand less about loneliness than you should not know. My mistake was smaller than that, quieter. That's what made it dangerous. My name doesn't matter, but I'm 59 years old. And I've been married for 36 years to a decent man who has never once forgotten to lock the back door at night or take the car in for an oil change when it needed one. A man who knows how I like my tea and still most mornings leaves my mug on the counter with the spoon resting neatly on the saucer. A man who worked hard, came home tired, paid the bills, raised our children with me, sat beside me through funerals and graduations and long winters and bad news from doctors and good news from banks. A good man. I need to say that first, because people are so eager to sort marriages into easy boxes. Happy or unhappy, faithful or broken, love or no love. But most long marriages, if you're honest, don't live in boxes. They live in habits, in folded laundry, in the sound of the same throat clearing from the same armchair every night around 8:15, in one person saying, "Did you lock up?" and the other saying, HM, without looking up from the television. There is comfort in that kind of life. There is safety in it. But there can also be a terrible quiet. By the time this happened, our children were long grown. My daughter lived 2 states away and called every Sunday if she wasn't too busy. My son worked strange hours and texted more often than he phoned. The house, which used to pulse with slammed doors and wet shoes and arguments over the bathroom, had become very tidy. Too tidy, maybe. I could wipe the kitchen counters in the morning and they would still be clean at bedtime. Some days the only sound in the house was the washing machine filling and draining. Like a calm, indifferent tide. My husband Peter had retired from one job and then somehow slid into another. Not because we needed the money desperately, though it helped, but because some men don't know what to do with themselves unless someone is expecting them at 9 o'clock sharp. He consulted part-time for a small construction supply company, mostly paperwork and client calls, and he seemed grateful to have somewhere to put his energy. I was glad too, in a way. Retirement had made him restless and prickly. Work gave him edges again. The owner of that company was a man named Daniel Mercer. He was younger than us by at least 15 years, maybe a little more. Early 40s, I think. Old enough to know himself, young enough to still stand too straight without thinking about it. I met him a handful of times over the years at Christmas dinners, a summer barbecue, once at a retirement luncheon for one of Peter's old colleagues. He was always polite, not flirtatious, not slick, not one of those men who makes every woman feel handled. If anything, he was unusually quiet for someone in charge of so many people. He listened when others talked. He remembered details. Once, at a company dinner, I mentioned in passing that I liked peonies, and the next spring, when Peter came home with some leftover centerpieces from an event, there had been peonies among them, pale pink and heavy-headed. Peter said Daniel had told the staff not to throw the arrangements away, that someone's wife will enjoy these. I remember thinking then that he was observant. Nothing more than that. Nothing more. That's important too. The day it started was ordinary enough to be almost laughable. It was April. Cold for April, one of those mean little days when the sky looks white instead of gray and the rain comes sideways. I had gone into town because my car was at the mechanic's and I needed a prescription from the pharmacy and a few things from the grocery store. Soup, bread, parsley, dish soap. The sort of list that says nothing about a person except that she plans to come home. I came out of the pharmacy balancing a paper bag under one arm and my purse on the other shoulder. And the rain had gotten worse while I was inside. Not a spring rain, not soft. Hard, needling rain that found the back of your neck at once. I stood under the narrow awning, waiting and hoping it might let up. It didn't. That was when a dark sedan pulled up at the curb and the passenger side window lowered. Mrs. Hawley. I bent slightly, peering through the rain, and saw Daniel in the driver's seat. He leaned across and pushed the door open. "Get in before you drown." I laughed, more out of surprise than anything else. "Oh, no, I'm all right. You're clearly not all right." "Get it in?" "I'm heading past Maple anyway." There are so many moments in life that feel harmless because they are so practical. It was raining. He was my husband's boss. I was carrying soup and dish soap, not secrets. So I got into the car, smelled faintly of coffee and cedar, maybe from whatever little air freshener hung somewhere I couldn't see. The seat was warm. Rain tapped against the windshield and 100 impatient fingers. I was conscious at once of my wet coat and damp hair, of the muddy hem of my slacks. "Sorry," I said, brushing at the seat. "I'm making a mess. You're not." He reached into the back and handed me a clean towel, the kind people keep for the gym. "Here, I remember that towel. White with a navy stripe." I remember blotting rain from my face and feeling absurdly grateful, absurdly seen for something so small. He pulled back into traffic. For a minute or two, we only talked about ordinary things: the weather, road construction near the high school, how impossible it was to find parking downtown. Then he glanced at the grocery bag by my feet. "Tomato soup?" I looked down. "How did you know?" The red label at the top. "My mother used to buy the same brand." "Your mother had good taste? She had no patience for fancy food." He smiled a little. "That might be the same thing." There was something easy in the way he spoke. Not familiar exactly. Not presumptuous. Just present. He wasn't performing charm. He was paying attention. When we stopped at a light, he looked over and said, "Peter mentioned your garden took a hit in the frost." I turned to him, genuinely surprised. "He told you that?" He complains about the frost like it personally insulted him. I laughed again, and this time it felt warmer. "That sounds like Peter. He said you'd spent all week covering the hydrangeas." I did. And it still wasn't enough. He said you were the only reason anything at that house blooms. It wasn't a grand compliment. In another mood, I might have let it pass without much notice. But I had spent so long feeling like the wallpaper in my own life that even secondhand praise landed like sunlight. I looked out at the rain streaking the glass. That was kind of him. Daniel didn't say anything for a second. Then softly he said, "I think he knows you hold more things together than he says." It was such a simple sentence, such a careful one, but I felt it somewhere under my ribs when he pulled into my driveway. He put the car in park and came around to carry my grocery bag to the porch before I could protest. Rain darkened the shoulders of his coat. I fumbled for my keys. "Thank you," I said, unlocking the door. "Really? You didn't have to do this?" "No," he said, handing me the bag. "But I wanted to." He smiled then, brave and tired and gentle, and went back to the car. That should have been all. I went inside, hung up my coat, put the soup in the pantry, the parsley in a glass of water, the dish soap under the sink. I dried my hair with a hand towel. I set the kettle on. And all through those tiny household movements, I kept hearing his voice. I wanted to, not because it was romantic, because it was deliberate by the time Peter got home that evening. His shoes squeaking faintly on the kitchen floor from the rain outside. I had already told myself I was being foolish. When I mentioned that Daniel had given me a ride, Peter only nodded and said, "Good, saved you a soaking." Then he asked if there was any of that tomato soup left. That's marriage, sometimes. One person quietly shifting inside their own skin while the other asks about supper. I wish I could say I forgot the moment after that. I didn't. A week later, I ran into Daniel again at a coffee shop near the garden center. I had gone out for potting soil and ended up ducking into the cafe because my feet hurt and the line at the register was too long. I was standing there deciding between a scone and a muffin when I heard, "You survived the frost then?" I turned and found him a few feet away, holding a paper cup. There was no reason for my heart to jump, but it did. We sat together because it would have seemed more awkward not to. At least that's what I told myself. The cafe smelled like cinnamon and wet coats. A milk steamer hissed behind the counter. Outside, the nursery carts gleamed with rain. He asked about the hydrangeas. I asked about work. He rolled his eyes, not theatrically, and said he sometimes thought owning a business really just meant solving other people's emergencies until you died. I laughed. Isn't that marriage too? He looked at me then, not quickly, but steadily. Is that how yours feels? The question wasn't rude. It wasn't even improper. And yet it felt as if someone had opened a door in a room I had lived in for years and forgotten had walls beyond them. I stirred my coffee, though it didn't need stirring. Some days. He nodded as if I had said something worth hearing. That sounds honest. No one had called me honest in a long time. Sensible, yes. Reliable. Nice. Organized. Even pretty once in a blue moon, usually from a friend trying to be kind. But honest? That word sat with me. We talked for nearly an hour. About nothing important if you looked at it from outside. Books half finished on bedside tables. How strange it was to become the same age your parents seemed when you were young. Whether music sounded different when you listened to it in the kitchen alone. He told me he had been divorced for 5 years, no children, and had learned that people only ask about loneliness if they want reassurance you don't feel it. And do you? I asked before I could stop myself. He smiled into his coffee cup. Of course. There was no flirtation in that moment. Only recognition. And that, I would learn, can be more intimate than flirting ever is thought after that. Life did what life always does. It continued. Laundry, phone calls, casserole dishes, a dentist appointment, weeding, a birthday card to my sister with the stamps kept in the blue drawer by the refrigerator. But now there was also an undercurrent. A sense that somewhere just beyond my routines was a version of myself that had not gone completely dim. Began noticing things I had stopped noticing. The way I tucked my hair behind my ear when I was nervous. The crackle of toast in the quiet kitchen at 6 a.m. The smell of rain on the porch boards. The softness of the old yellow cardigan I wore on cool evenings. How long it had been since anyone looked at me as if my thoughts were arriving before I spoke them. That embarrassed me. It also woke me up that the next time we met was not planned. At least not officially. I was walking the path around Miller Pond just before dusk, trying to make myself feel virtuous about exercise, when I saw him on a bench near the water with his jacket folded beside him. He stood when he noticed me, as if I were someone to greet properly. Do you always appear wherever I'm feeling sorry for myself? I asked. Only on weekdays, he said. The pond was all silver that evening, wind rippled and cold. A few ducks cut V-shapes through the surface. We walked one slow loop together. He told me he came there when he needed to think. I admitted I mostly came there when the house felt too still. Does Peter know you walk here? He asked. The question made me smile a little. I'm not 16. No, he said quietly. You're not. I don't know why that made me blush, but it did. Somewhere near the wooden footbridge, he asked, Are you happy? There it was. The question that would come back to me later in bed, while folding towels, while slicing onions, while standing at the sink rinsing out teacups. Are you happy? I gave the answer wives often give when they don't know whether they're allowed to answer honestly. I have a good life. He was silent a moment. That wasn't what I asked. I should have been offended. I should have ended the walk there. Instead, I stared at the water slipping under the bridge and said, very softly, I used to think that was the same thing. He didn't touch me. He didn't step closer. He only said, I'm sorry. For what? For asking a question you may not have wanted to hear yourself answer. When I got home that evening, Peter was in the den watching a documentary about shipwrecks. I stood in the doorway, still wearing my walking shoes, and watched the blue light flicker over his face. How was your walk? He asked without turning. Nice, I said. He nodded. Good. That was all. That was the whole exchange. But I stood there another second, feeling something so strong it was nearly grief. Not because he had done anything wrong. Because he didn't know there was anything to ask Dot after that. I began to draw lines and then step near them. Daniel, and I never made plans in any explicit way. It was always I might be near the nursery Thursday, or I walk by the pond sometimes after 5, or there's a farmer's market downtown on Saturdays. If the rain holds. All of it vague enough to deny. Specific enough to understand. We had coffee. We walked. Once we stood under the striped awning of a closed bakery while a summer storm passed and talked about our mothers. Once he helped me lift a heavy bag of mulch into the trunk of a borrowed car, and our hands brushed for half a second on the handle. Nothing happened. Everything happened. He noticed when I was tired. He noticed when I was pretending. He noticed when I laughed because I thought I ought to, and when I laughed because something was actually funny. He would ask me what I was reading and remember the answer the next week. He would listen without rushing to fix what I said. There is such tenderness in being listened to. People forget that. At home, Peter and I moved around each other with the old fluency of long marriage. He liked his eggs over medium. I liked mine scrambled softly. He clipped coupons he never used. I deadheaded the roses and wiped the table after dinner and pretended not to notice. When silence came to sit between us like a third person, he was not unkind. Let me say that again. He was not unkind. But there are absences that bruise too. I started taking more care with myself than I had in years. Not lipstick exactly, though once I put some on and wiped it off before he got home. But earrings, a better blouse to the market, hand cream before leaving the house. I even had my hair trimmed shorter around my face. And when my daughter saw me on a video call, she said, Mom, you look refreshed. I laughed too loudly and blamed the weather. Guilt became my shadow. It showed up in ridiculous places. In the way I over-explained errands. In the way I left my phone face up on the kitchen counter, though there was nothing incriminating on it. In the way I sometimes overcompensated with Peter, asking about his day with bright false energy, touching his shoulder when I passed, suggesting we go out to dinner even when I knew he'd say he was too tired. One night, while folding his undershirts warm from the dryer, I started crying. Not big tears, not dramatic ones, just a sudden spilling over, as if my body had decided before my mind did that I could not go on living half awake. I sat on the edge of the bed with one of his t-shirts in my lap and asked myself the question again, are you happy? I didn't know, but I knew I was no longer numb, and that frightened me almost as much as it thrilled me. The turning point came in late August. It had been hot for days. That heavy kind of heat that makes even the curtains look tired. Daniel and I met at the pond just before sunset, not because we said we would exactly, but because we both knew. The air smelled of cut grass and warm water. Cicadas buzzed in the trees. My blouse stuck to the middle of my back. He seemed restless from the beginning. Quieter than usual, but not calm. We walked only half the loop before he stopped near the old bench under the willow tree. I can't keep pretending this is nothing, he said. I remember everything about that moment. The willow leaves whispering overhead, the pressure of my sandal strap against my heel, a child somewhere laughing on the far side of the water, my own pulse hard and foolish. I looked at him, but I already knew. He did not move closer. That is still part of why I trusted him. He kept his hands at his sides. I'm not asking you for anything, he said. I need you to know that first. Then don't say it, I whispered. A sad smile touched his mouth. You know already. Yes, I said. That was the first honesty. He looked down toward the pond. I think about you too much. I wait to run into you, and when I do, it makes my whole day feel sharper somehow, better, and I know who you are. I know whose wife you are. I know what this looks like, and I hate that. I could hardly breathe. He turned back to me then, and there was no hunger in his face, nothing crude, nothing greedy. Only helplessness, affection, regret. It would have been easier if he had been less decent. I have never wanted to disrespect you, he said. Or Peter, I know. Then why are we here? There it was. The question behind the question, because you saw me, I wanted to say. Because when you asked if I was happy, the floor under my life shifted. Because there is a terrible sweetness in being visible after years of becoming furniture in your own home. Instead, I said the truest thing I knew. Because I liked who I was when I was with you. His face changed at that, not with triumph, but with pain. That's not nothing, he said. No. We stood in that heat with all the evening around us. And for one reckless second, I thought, this is the part where lives split open. This is where I step forward. This is where he touches my face. This is where I become the woman I never imagined I could be. But life is not only made of longing. It is also made of consequence. I saw Peter in my mind then. Not as an obstacle, not as a villain, as my husband. The man who had sat in plastic hospital chairs when I had surgery. The man who knew how my father took his coffee before my father even passed away. The man who had once driven 3 hours after work to bring me my forgotten dress shoes before a funeral. The man who had stopped asking certain questions, yes, but who had also carried a life with me, brick by brick, for nearly 4 decades, and I saw myself too if I crossed that line. Not romantic, not reborn, just divided. I shook my head. We can't, I said. He closed his eyes briefly, as if he had prepared for that answer and still hoped against it. I know. No, I said, and my voice trembled. I mean, we really can't. Not just because it would hurt people. Because I think this matters too much already. He looked at me for a long moment. Then he nodded. That's probably true. I laughed then, one broken little laugh that was dangerously close to a sob. You see? This is what I mean. Even now you're making it easier for me. His expression softened. I'm trying not to make it harder. That almost undid me. He took one step back. Only one. It felt enormous. Then let me say one selfish thing, he said. I didn't answer. You deserve to be asked, he said. That's all. You deserve to be asked if you're happy. You deserve an answer to matter. I covered my mouth with my hand because I could not trust my face. We did not kiss. I want to be very clear about that. He did not touch me, and I did not touch him. The nearest we came was the charged little emptiness between us. That aching space full of everything we were refusing to do. After a while, I said, Goodbye, Daniel. He nodded once. Goodbye. I walked back to my car without turning around, though every part of me wanted to. My hands shook on the steering wheel. By the time I got home, the sky had gone deep blue and the first porch light on our street had come on. Peter was in the kitchen, cutting a peach over the sink because he always hated the mess of peach juice on the table. He looked up when I came in. "There you are," he said. "I was starting to think you got lost." Something in me gave way then, not toward Daniel, toward truth. I set my purse down and said, "Peter, can I ask you something?" He blinked, knife still in hand. "Sure, are you happy?" He stared at me as if I had started speaking another language. "With us, I mean," I said, my voice shaking now. "With this life." "With me." He set the knife carefully on the cutting board. "Where is this coming from?" "Please don't answer a question with a question." That got his attention. He pulled out a chair and sat down slowly. "I don't know," he said after a moment. "I suppose I thought we were fine." "Fine," I repeated, and even then I heard the sadness in it. He rubbed his forehead. "I know that's not a good answer." "No," I said. "It isn't." We talked for 2 hours that night. Really talked, maybe for the first time in years. Not perfectly, not poetically. There were long silences and defensiveness and moments where one of us misunderstood the other and had to start again. I didn't tell him about Daniel, not the full shape of it. Some truths help, and some only wound for the sake of purity. But I did tell him I have been lonely, that I felt unseen, that I had let parts of myself go numb because it was easier than admitting I wanted more tenderness than our daily life seemed to offer. To his credit, Peter did not get angry. He got quiet in the way he does when something has entered him deeply. Finally, he said, "I didn't know it had gotten that bad." I looked at him across the kitchen table, at the peaches browning slightly on the cutting board, at the damp dish towel by the sink, at the little ordinary room where so much of our life had happened, and I said, "Neither did I, not until I did." He nodded very slowly. A week later, he asked if I wanted to go with him to the lake for the afternoon. Not a grand gesture. Just sandwiches and a cooler and 2 folding chairs and a radio that barely held a station. We sat there with the water moving in front of us and the sun on our knees. And at one point he reached over and adjusted my hat brim because it had slipped crooked across my forehead. Such a small touch. But it nearly made me cry. Change, when it comes at our age, does not usually arrive like lightning. It comes like someone opening a stuck window. A little at first, then more. Enough air to remind you there is air. I never met Daniel alone again. A month later, Peter mentioned casually that Daniel was thinking of relocating one of the offices and might be traveling more. I said nothing. Sometime after that, I heard through the same harmless channels of small-town life that he had started seeing someone. I don't know if it was serious. I didn't ask out once. In the grocery store parking lot, I saw him across 3 rows of cars. He saw me too. We both paused. Then he lifted a hand in the smallest wave, respectful and final. I waved back. That was all. And yet I still think about him. Not every day. Not in the feverish way you might imagine. More like one thinks about a road not taken after the map has long been folded away. Not because I believe he was the love of my life. He wasn't. He was something stranger and, in its way, more useful than that. He was a mirror. He showed me the woman I have been missing. If you want the moral to be that temptation is evil, I can give you that and it will sound neat enough. If you want the lesson to be that loyal wives must never enjoy attention, I suppose some people would nod along to that too. But the truth is less tidy. The truth is that sometimes the thing that almost ruins you is also the thing that reveals what has been quietly starving inside you. I did not have an affair. I did not run away. I went back to my marriage, yes, but not in the old sleepwalking way. Peter and I are still together now. We are not magically transformed people. He still leaves cabinet doors open. I still buy too much parsley. We still fall into silence sometimes. But now, once in a while, one of us asks the other, "Are you happy?" And we don't answer carelessly. That question lives in the house with us now. Not as an accusation, as a lamp. If I regret anything, it isn't that I felt what I felt. Feelings arrive. That's their nature. I regret how long I lived without looking directly at my own life. How long I accepted fine as though it were the same thing as a live dot, so yes. Please don't make the same mistake I did. Don't wait until a stranger, or almost a stranger, or someone forbidden by circumstance but gentle in his attention asks you the question you should have been asking yourself for years. Don't wait until your heart starts beating in an unfamiliar rhythm just because somebody remembered what flowers you liked, or noticed when you were tired, or listened as if your words belonged to a real person and not a role you had been performing too long. And if someone does ask you, if someone looks at you in the middle of your ordinary life and says, in one way or another, "Are you happy?" then for heaven's sake, answer before it's too late to do so cleanly, "I was lucky." That's all. Lucky that the line I approached was guarded by two decent people and one trembling conscience. Lucky that what happened between us stayed in the space where it could still be turned into a warning instead of a wreck. Sometimes, in the early morning, I stand at the kitchen sink waiting for the kettle to boil, and I look out at the garden. The hydrangeas were covered, by the way. Not perfectly, but enough. New growth came in where the frost had blackened the edges. That feels meaningful to me, though. Perhaps it shouldn't. Peter comes in rubbing sleep from his eyes, asks if I fed the birds, reaches for his mug. The house is still the same house. The spoon still rests on the saucer. The counters still need wiping. The day still opens in plain, unremarkable ways, but I am different in it now. And sometimes, when the light is soft and the kettle just beginning to murmur, I ask myself the question once more, not sadly, not fearfully, just honestly, "Are you happy?" Some mornings the answer is yes. Some mornings it is not yet, but at least now it is mine to answer.